tonight, Beyond Glasgow, Our Climate Future, and we'll begin in just a couple of minutes. So come on in and relax and get ready for a wonderful panel to inform us and hopefully inspire us as well with their own commitment to our climate future. Welcome, everyone. I'm Jonas Magrum, the chair of the Iowa chapter of Sierra Club's Climate Committee, and very glad to have you here. I'll be moderating tonight's call, and we'll begin in about a minute or so. So welcome, so glad you're here, and I'm sure that you'll enjoy tonight's presentation. Welcome everyone to tonight's Zoom call. We'll begin very shortly. So glad to have you here with us for our Beyond Glasgow, Our Climate Future Zoom presentation. Welcome. Okie dokie. Again, my name is Jonas Magrum. It is my privilege to moderate tonight's panel discussion, and we're so glad to have you all here with us tonight, and as well as our panelists, of course. Nothing would happen without them. So just a couple things to start us off. First of all, if you have questions, those should be submitted through the Q&A feature, which is, you should be able to find that at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Please don't put questions in the chat. You're very welcome to place comments in the chat and also to introduce yourself. We'd love to know who you are, where you're from, why you're here, whatever you would like to share with us. But for questions, please submit those through the Q&A. And also, as I believe you were notified when you joined the call, we are recording the call, and we appreciate your participation. Of course, your microphones are off, so you don't have to worry about us hearing or recording anything at your end. So we have, as you know, some very distinguished guests tonight, including our congressman, not our congressman from Iowa, but Congressman Ro Khanna. And we also have Ayla Boylan and Tam Marcus, and Dr. Kamyar and Cheyenne, who will be our panelists tonight. I will introduce those three wonderful guests in just a few minutes, but first we want to hear from our guest, who is a congressman from California. Unfortunately, earlier today, given how extremely busy Congress people tend to be, did have to tell us, Ro did have to tell us that he could not attend live and in person. However, not to be too disappointed, because he did take the time to record a video message for us. And just before we play that message, I'd like to tell you a little bit about Ro. Congressman Ro Khanna serves as the representative for California's 17th district. He is a progressive capitalist who has led the way on tech policy and job creation, working across the aisle. A Democrat, the congressman succeeded in passing 5 bills into law during the Trump administration. He led the way in the passage of the Endless Frontiers Act, which invests $250 billion in science and technology hubs across the United States. As chairman of the Oversight Committee on the Environment, the congressman has championed climate justice, holding the very first congressional hearing with Big Oil to put a stop to climate disinformation. During his time in Congress, he has worked in partnership with Silicon Valley tech companies to spread the wealth of high-paying digital jobs to areas of the country left behind in the digital revolution. So even though he is pre-recorded, we're very honored to have Congressman Ro Khanna speak to us now.
Hi, everyone. It's Ro Khanna. I just wanted to give you an update from Washington. COP26, in my view, was a disappointment. We really didn't get the commitments that we need to tackle the climate crisis. I mean, if we're serious about the Paris Accords, if we're serious about not letting temperature rise beyond 1.5 degrees Celsius, we need an actual commitment to reduce emissions by 50% by 2030 and a plan for doing that, which requires less drilling of oil. I mean, that's what the UN says, actually, yearly reduction in oil drilling, and it requires a bold commitment on investment in renewable energy, which is going to be an extraordinary source of wealth generation. I mean, it's one of the biggest bets we can make in terms of economic opportunity. Yet you had a conference where the United States wasn't able to go because we didn't have Build Back Better. We need to make sure we actually pass that $600 billion of investment in climate to supplement what we did with the bipartisan infrastructure bill. Now we need the climate bill, and we need to make sure we have a fee and tax on methane. I suppose that was one thing that emerged that was positive, China and the US agreeing to a methane tax. But China is nowhere near where they need to be. They're talking about 25% reduction by 2030, and they're the largest carbon polluter. So what can we do? We ought to do what Paul Krugman recommends, a carbon tariff. I mean, if they're exporting goods to the United States, they should pay for the carbon that they're emitting. That will incentivize them, in my view, to invest more in renewable. And we need to be the leader. We need to make sure that we invest in solar, invest in wind, invest in hydro, invest in battery storage, that we actually hit these 2030 targets of 50% reduction, that the president takes executive action to do it, that we take leadership in the states. And then one more thing, and you all know this, we need to talk about the role of agriculture. Moratorium on CAFOs. I'm working with my friend Senator Cory Booker on that. CAFOs are a huge problem with the water runoff, the pollution runoff, the atmosphere impact of CO2. We need to make sure we're talking about regenerative agriculture and funding for regenerative agriculture, empowering farmers who are stewards of the land, as Matt Russell's work has shown. So we need to be far more proactive in looking at how we empower farmers, how we take on some of the worst practices in big ag with big meat packers, and we make reform there. But I will tell you what, there's some greater awareness about climate than there ever has been in Congress in my 5 years. The new generation is passionate about it, and I really want to applaud you for your activism, your involvement. Send your best ideas. Keep advocating. Our planet's at stake. We can do this with your energy, with a mobilized movement. We will make sure that our generation tackles this big challenge. Thank you for your work. Thank you for letting me share a few remarks.
Thank you, Congressman. So I think that one of the first things we'll all address here tonight, or our panelists will be asked to address, is their assessment of COP26. And I won't put any words in their mouth. We'll wait just a few minutes because I want to introduce them first. They deserve it. And by the way, just before I move on, I would like to recognize Mike Carberry, Pam Mackey-Taylor, and Jess Mazur and the Iowa chapter of the Sierra Club for organizing tonight's event. All of them put in a lot of time and effort, and we're very grateful that they brought us all together tonight. So please let me first introduce Ayla Boylan. Ayla is a senior in the Fine Arts program at Mount Mercy University. They started their own Fridays for Future climate strike outside the Cedar Rapids City Hall, and they believe their work, alongside many other hardworking community members and sunrisers, played a part in influencing the city to quickly pass a climate resolution, and following that, a citizens' climate plan. They are now the head of the political action half of their local Sunrise Hub and are involved with several other social justice groups in Cedar Rapids, including the NAACP Climate Justice Committee. So welcome, Ayla. And next, I would like to introduce Tamara Marcus, aka Tam. Tam is the Lynn County Sustainability Manager and a PhD candidate in the Natural Resources and Earth System Sciences program at the University of New Hampshire. Her research interests include using bioinformatics techniques to understand the impact of warming on microbial mediation of carbon emissions from Arctic lakes. Tamara also studies how Indigenous communities access weather and climate data to better understand how to make results from climate research more accessible and applicable. Ms. Marcus has been a Fulbright Nehru Fellow, a NASA New Hampshire Space Grant Fellow, and a National Center for Atmospheric Research Fellow. She is also a co-founder of the Cedar Rapids-based nonprofit Advocates for Social Justice. So welcome, Tam. So glad to have you as well. And last, but certainly not least, we have Dr. Kamyar Inshayan. Dr. Inshayan directs the University of Northern Iowa Center for Energy and Environmental Education. The center manages a 100-member AmeriCorps, I think, is that how I pronounce it? I hope, AmeriCorps program focused on energy and community resilience initiatives in collaboration with partner organizations across Iowa. Kamyar is involved in several long-term projects, turning science and evidence into action at the community scale. He is not only a teacher inspiring new generations of students, but also an activist trying to improve the food system in Iowa through action in communities. So welcome, Dr. Inshayan.
Nice to be with you.
So we have our three panelists, and we're going to begin, as I suggested, by asking all of them, perhaps in the order that I just introduced them, this following question. What is your assessment of COP26? What about it gives you the greatest hope? And what about it gives you the greatest concern? So could we please start with you, Ayla?
Thank you for the introduction, Jonas. That's how I feel about the climate summit. Honestly, overall, I'm disappointed, and I think that everyone on the panel today is going to echo that. You know, and I can align very much with Greta Thunberg in that it was a lot of empty words and people saying the same things that we've heard government officials say for several years. The few things that did give me hope were the amount of countries represented there, as well as the fact that we do seem to have many of the answers that we need and the technology that we need to combat the climate crisis. I think that, you know, obviously the most disappointing part is that there was no commitments to use any of those technologies, especially by the countries creating the most emissions and pollution, as well as the countries with the most means to enact those solutions very quickly. So that's my short answer to that, I suppose. I'm sure there will be a lot of similar thoughts echoed by the other panelists, so I want to leave some.
Thank you, Ayla. And Tam?
Yeah, thank you, Jonas, and thank you to the organizers and the invitation to join. Colleagues that I really admire and have gotten the opportunity to work with in the past, and I'm thankful to have that opportunity again. I think this speaks to the need to think about not only the mechanisms to reduce our CO2 emissions, our carbon emissions generally, but also the mechanisms to put people who are most and disproportionately impacted by these decisions at the forefront of that decision-making process. You know, it's not, a lot of what's talked about is something that is really well understood, and maybe not using the big fancy words that us scientists like to use. But, you know, bringing it locally here, we as the community in Lynn County have experienced 3 disaster events in the last 12 years that are arguably driven by climate change. And though that response might be, though that event is shared, the response to that is not the same. And so it's not this feel-good moment of let's all sit together in a room and talk about what we want to do, right? It's there are real people and real examples that have life experience that can inform the processes that not only address the acute and short-term challenges that we face, housing insecurity, food insecurity, high utility bills, right? But those same solutions also contribute to addressing the climate crisis. And so when we're in these rooms, especially post George Floyd, you know, the world is paying attention to, you know, issues of social justice in a way that it has not done in decades. We have not done in decades. Why are we not using this opportunity to not be mouthpieces for these individuals, but actually create systems to get these individuals into the rooms where decisions are made? And I look at COP26 and I think this is the same people talking about the same things again. And they have no idea because they don't face, it's not as real to them as it is to the people who deal with it every day. And so what are we doing, everyone in this room, myself included, what are we doing to get those people into those positions of power to make those decisions? And that is always the takeaway from any of these kinds of meetings, right? For me personally.
Thank you, Tim. And Kamyar, would you please share your impressions?
Yeah, so obviously I wasn't there. It's really hard to know all the details of the dynamics and everything. I agree with the congressman who said all we needed was commitment, to commit to doing this. That's number one, like the first step, commit. And I guess I keep thinking of previous international commitments that, I mean, I would say the only encouraging thing is that they did actually get together. They saw each other. Maybe, you know, they were actually maybe trying. Some people obviously were trying. And you think of other international agreements that we have been successful at with CFCs and with, you know, there's so many other international agreement that postal service, you know, there's all these examples that we are already in international, and they're very complex. They're not easy things. So I guess I'm puzzled as to why they didn't commit. They didn't, you know, what we as Ayla and Tamara said, we already know what needs to be done. It's not, there is no big magical thing. Let's commit, let's get busy. I would say the challenge I see, my sense of it, I'm kind of like Tamara, my work on a daily basis is rooted in where I live and the region where I am. And so I think of solutions that make sense to me here in where I live, in my community and the people I know. And obviously when heads of states who are meeting out there, they're speaking, they want to do things, and it doesn't seem the governments that they represent fully support them. In this case, we know that's the case. In our case, like the Congress and Senate aren't fully behind President Biden when if he commits to something, you know, or as a nation, right? We have a lot of heavy lifting to do. There's a disconnect between people who represent us and our wishes and our reality, as Tamara said, what we experience here in terms of damage. So we have work to do. I guess, you know, there's only so much they can do. And again, the question I keep saying, well, what are some things that are that we have agency here? What are some things that we need to do to, you know, to change things, given the lack of leadership at their scale? So that's kind of not very satisfying answer, but yeah.
Thank you. It's an honest answer. That's all we're asking for, Kamyar. So thank you very much. Thank you, all three of you, for those introductory comments. I'm gonna reverse things a little here. Kamyar, you asked the rhetorical question. You know, we seem to have solved so many complex problems in the past. Why aren't, you know, why can't we get this handled? And so here's the question. It has been reported by multiple news outlets, including the BBC, that over 500 people with links to the fossil fuel interests had been accredited for this climate summit. This number is larger than the combined total of the 8 delegations from the countries worst affected by climate change in the past 20 years. So can necessary progress, could this be the problem, or a significant part of the problem, the insertion of these big oil interests into the discussion of our climate solutions?
I mean, I can just have a stab at it. First of all, it's no surprise to me, right? You know, what do you expect? And imagine if there was a similar gathering at the State House about Iowa's energy situation or food. I like to draw a parallel between, imagine if there was a conference in Iowa about agriculture. There would be agribusiness people all over the place. They already are. So our whole state is compromised by that. Our democracy is compromised in Iowa by the deep influence of agribusiness. So the same in the fossil fuel discussion, unfortunately. So the reality is we have a weak democracy. Again, I can't speak for the world, but I can speak for my nation here, that we have a weak democracy and we have work to do. Unless we elect better people, it's just not going to happen. So
thank you. Which we'll talk about next year and the elections that are coming up later. I'm sure someone will bring that up. So, Ayla, coming out of COP26, Greta Thunberg said, quote, "Words are all we hear from our so-called leaders. Words that sound great, but so far have not led to action. Our hopes and ambitions drown in their empty promises," unquote. Of course, she said a few other spicy words too that we won't quote here. I imagine, Ayla, you agree with Greta. What do you think she means by those statements?
I mean, here in the United States, it's pretty easy to see that Joe Biden ran, you know, for this election with a climate policy promise. I mean, he used climate in winning this race, and he has yet to deliver on that. So that, I mean, on our national level, that is very evident, I think, to anyone who's paying any attention. I mean, we've just continually been betrayed by our leaders in making these empty promises that they don't deliver on. You know, and with this particular climate summit, they didn't even really make promises. There were no commitments, because those haven't really even mattered that much, at least on our national level in the past, unless it's in writing. So, I mean, it's really easy, I think, to see what she means. It doesn't really matter what promises are made. The situation is very real, the science is there, and the situation is going to continue to get worse. No matter how many words are spoken, we need action. So I think that is really what we can all take away from this this climate summit we've seen. So
thank you, Ayla. Thank you. And for those of you who are listening to our panel, it was inevitable that we would have to deal with these disappointments from COP26, but we promise you, as we move through our evening together, we're also going to challenge our panelists in terms of what we can do and how we can be empowered right here in Iowa to make the best of a situation that's difficult, to say the least. So Tam, you did talk about some of these social justice issues and how they integrate, but I will ask you to elaborate. Well, wait, why don't I do that first? A lot of people don't understand the connection between climate change and racial and economic justice. And we apologize for that. But would you please take a couple minutes and just help us all understand more clearly how these do connect, and share how you've seen it show up here in Iowa and in Lynn County?
Yeah, sure. So I'm one of the co-founders of the Advocates for Social Justice, as Jonas, you mentioned in my introduction. Thank you. That is the Cedar Rapids-based Black Liberation Movement group. And it was not, so I'm a climate scientist by training. I've been studying climate change for over a decade in the Indian Himalayas, the Australian outback, the Swedish Arctic as a PhD candidate. So my area of expertise is in the environmental and climate world. However, after the murder of George Floyd, I was back in my hometown and I banded together with two other of my friends to organize protests and to present demands to the local city, to our city council around police reform. And this was a space, as I've already kind of shared, that is not my area of expertise. And it was maybe not surprising to others, but to me, it was very surprising how easy it was to fit into that sphere. A lot of my climate research had been based, as also mentioned in my introduction, around equity, issues of equity, trying to build in inclusive methodologies to understand ecosystem change from a more holistic and comprehensive perspective, right? So this is something that I'm used to kind of thinking about in the science realm. And to me, it was notable how easy it was to kind of transfer this into police reform, right? And that's not a me thing, that's an issue thing, right? Because when we talk about vulnerability, there's a lot of the same people who are disproportionately policed are also the same individuals who experience the climate crisis disproportionately as well. And so I actually had a conversation about vulnerability. I used the phrase climate vulnerability, and they're like, well, why is that different than, like, that's just vulnerability, social vulnerability, it's the same, right? But no, it's not the same. And it's not the same. And I'll give you a perfect example of that from Lynn County, the derecho. We hear people talk about this, right? The derecho touched every square mile of Lynn County, every square mile. No one was left untouched. At the very least, you lost a tree, maybe your doghouse blew over, probably more, definitely more for many others. We all experienced that event. That stimulus was shared. That response is very different. And that is how these issues of social justice, social and racial justice are interconnected with the environmental movement, really environmental justice. That response will not be the same. There are the people who can pay for their repairs have done so. And there are many people who are not left just without the physical infrastructure of housing, right? But these social networks that once disrupted are not repaired quickly, or if at all, ever. Think about the individuals living in a low-income apartment complex. Likely there are in social relationships that, you know, you cook for me, you cook for my kids on Tuesday because I work late. And I'll watch your kids on Sunday because you have to go into work early. What happens when that apartment complex is destroyed and these individuals have to move? You have to rebuild these social structures, these relationships, and also figure out how you're going to replace your car, right? How you're going to reconnect your utilities, all of these additional things. And maybe you're a single parent. And so it's just you trying to figure that out. So we all experience disaster events, but that experience is not shared. And the burden is greater on others than it is on others. And being aware of that, not only in the short term, in one disaster, right? But also trying to forecast for future disasters, which are inevitable. And so what is the investment that we're making now to safeguard those communities that are least equipped to respond to that disruption? And so that is the best example I can give, tangible, you know, real example of how these movements interplay, and the need to build those connections between organizations that aim to address climate change and those that aim to uplift those that are most vulnerable among us, right? So how do we build those partnerships between the NAACP, the Young Parents Network, LULAC, Sunrise, Sierra Club? That is the work that we have to do. You're muted, Jonas. I talked too long, sorry.
It's fine. You're fine. You're fine. So let's see. So I don't know if my fellow organizers will beat me for this, but this discussion seems to have an organic flow to it, and I'd like to follow that. And I'll watch my text messages to see if people don't like what I'm doing, if I can find my phone. But anyway, so here's what I'd like to ask of you, Kamyar. Do you, this is a very powerful point that Tam just brought up. And do you think that the reason that the world governments, namely the biggest governments in the world, are so slow to respond to this crisis is because they think they have the money to deal with the hurt that it will inflict on their nations? And you know, the rest of the world be damned. Do you think that economic, that sense that I'm insulated, even if I'm not insulated fully from climate's impact, that I'm insulated economically? Do you think there's that thinking going on?
Yeah, I mean, probably, I don't know. I mean, it seems like, yeah, we feel like, you know, immune, we can fix it. You know, you go around the world, you see, oh, a lot of things are half done. People haven't been able to, you know, I mean, it is like exactly as Tam said, there are a lot of places won't be able to recover. I mean, the towns that got torched in California, what are they gonna do? You know, I mean, we already know parts of Iowa that were flooded are no longer there. We already have internal refugees. People in North Cedar, north of my town, are no longer there, right? Because they, you know, the poor planning, etc. And, you know, that was the cheapest place they could be, right? So, yeah, I mean, there is a sense, you know, affluence, right? We think we're very affluent. Well, how far, I mean, how many of these disasters are we going to do, right? I mean, at some point, you know, we're going to have to say, well, how much do one of these barriers for Cedar River flood, how often are we going to put them up? It seemed like Cedar Rapids was putting them up once a year. And, you know, I don't know how many $1 million it cost each time. Tamara probably knows, but I know it was in the news. It was like, I don't know, $2 or $3 million each or something each time, something like that. um, and yeah, I mean, it is we seem to feel immune from, or you're right, that we think we're going to recover from this real quick, but each one of them, I mean, think about, where does this stuff go? What landfill, right? Where does we have to, it's so much material that we've thrown away, all these good homes that were there and no longer there, et cetera, right? We can't afford this level of consumption. So yeah, I mean, there are some, I guess maybe depending on some of the other questions you have, I honestly think there a bunch of these issues are moral and cultural issues that we really need to have conversation. We haven't had those conversations in our communities, and we just keep thinking of solar and wind, like we keep going this way and we'll just have solar and wind. We need to have like big conversation about consumption, about reduction in energy use, and imagining better ways of being here that are more equitable. So there's a lot of good thing we can do to not just think, oh, we're immune to this, we'll fix it, doesn't matter.
Thank you very much, Kamyar. Of course, just a reminder to our panelists that you're welcome to chime in on a question that was asked of another, if you feel to do so. I'm going back and forth on my screen between my questions and seeing you. So if I don't wave to me because I might not see you, you could just speak up if you're called to do so. Ultimately, I imagine our discussion is going to go towards what can we do. Before we get there or in that process, Ayla, would you please talk a little bit about what you see going on in Iowa with respect to efforts to pass legislation that will help us reduce our carbon output and to fund solutions like wind and solar in Iowa? Would just like to hear what you think about our current situation here.
Currently our state government is largely apathetic or just straight up antagonistic here in Iowa to climate action and the climate crisis as a whole. I think that getting our governor to take action on climate change in any way, or really even addressing that term, is going to be incredibly difficult and almost impossible. So other than, ousting the governor and throwing our own activists in charge, I think that that's probably not doable. In terms of like real answers, I would say what we've chosen to focus on with our Sunrise Hub here in Cedar Rapids is citywide action. The American Federal Relief Funds, luckily in Iowa, bypassed our state government. So we're able to apply for that here as organizations. Our city has money and our county has money that they can potentially put into these projects. So as citizens and residents here, we can push them to do that, as well as we have a competitive application program for those funds. So if we can design our own projects that revolve around climate action, we can potentially receive funding to do that. Cedar Rapids, I'm very lucky, is a city that is big enough that I've only been here for 4 years, and I've been able to enact some change and create sort of a role for myself here. And then with that, it's small enough that, I'm able to have a voice here rather quickly, but it's large enough that it's setting an example for other cities around Iowa. We've been able to work with other hubs within Sunrise National through Iowa, and then also other climate hubs such as Citizens for Community Improvement and things like that. And we've used our climate plan here, our climate resolution, and now our citizens community action plan as templates and sent those to different hubs and organizations to help them enact them in their cities. So we're kind of taking it from an even more grassroots perspective than a statewide, and using our power here as a city to influence other cities and sort of work our way up instead of top down because of how difficult that is here. I've seen a lot of organizers, especially within the climate and social justice movements, expend all of their energy trying to get our state level government to budge, and essentially needing to step back because they're exhausted. Because, I mean, this fight is already impossible enough without people constantly not listening. So, yeah, that's the way we've chosen to do it here. We're rather lucky for our position to do that.
Can I say something, Jonas?
Please.
What you said, Ayla, is so critical. When we're not making, when people at the state, federal level aren't properly responding, you've been active in your city, right? We got to keep finding where we have agency, where we have traction. And Tamara, through your work at the county, we're just gonna kind of keep figuring out where we're making progress. It's really encouraging to hear you say that, Ayla, because in some ways, maybe we've neglected we've neglected not pressuring our local utilities, local county government, city government, school government. These are all places that use a lot of fossil energy, and they need to take responsibility for their consumption. And so, as we all need to, so it's so important what you just said.
Thank you both. Probably, I'm sure everyone has heard about these plans for this CO2 capture pipeline running all over our state. And without necessarily specifically addressing that, Tam, can you please help our participants, our audience, our participants really understand this concept of greenwashing? And of course, I just gave an example, but if you could just help us understand what greenwashing schemes look like compared to real solid climate solutions, and if possible, give us some tips on how we can tell the difference.
Yeah, I will do my best. This is not, I think this is a word that you've self-selected to be here tonight, so I'm sure you've heard it at least once before, but just companies making money off of saying that, these basically people who have a conscience around environmentalism and sustainability, without actually having to do any of the operational changes required to actually reduce their impact to produce those products. I think, the straw conversation is a really great example of that, right? Let's get rid of straws. Yeah, they're awful, right? But it's not really just the straw piece that is problematic. And I actually found out recently that there's more plastic used in the cups that replaced Starbucks, because they were the leaders in doing, I think, and getting the straws out of, kind of stigmatizing straw usage. And there's actually more plastic in the replacement for in reducing those straws and removing those straws from production, which I thought is very ironic, but probably not surprising to most of us that have encountered companies pretending to be more green than they are. And so, I think I'm from a very young age, I guess, maybe in high school, we learn about the 3 R's, right? What are the 3 R's? Reduce, reuse, recycle, right? 3 R's. But there's actually 5. So there's reduce, reuse, and recycle. And then there's repurpose, and my personal favorite, refuse, right? And so this is, to Kamir's point of consumption, this is the real linchpin in the operation, right? If we can actually refuse that bag that they put the gallon of milk in, that's also in plastic, right? If we can refuse, you know, even just like sometimes you have to buy a disposable coffee cup because of the society we live in, right? Can you maybe just like hold it in a different way to not use that extra like slidey bit? Yeah. And I know there's this conversation about, okay, yes, most of our emissions come from industry, right? But there's also some of these behavioral individual changes that feed up into this larger aim of reducing at that highest level, right? And they matter. They matter. I think they matter. Yeah. Because it makes you attuned to everything else that's going on in the world, right? And I think I say this often, and it's unpopular in some environmental circles, but you know, we don't all think the same, and that's okay. But do one thing. Do one thing. And for me, that was the bag thing. That was not what it was, refusing a bag. It was thinking about, okay, I keep forgetting to bring my own bags. And so I'm just going to put them in my trunk. Right. And then that's how you start to train your brain. That's how you train your brain to exercise. That's how you train your brain to eat healthy. That's how you train your brain to be nice to people, maybe if you have an issue with that, right? But like, train your brain. And you do that by doing one thing. So greenwashing, generally, you know, be attuned to, you know, don't just take at face value. Don't listen to Starbucks saying, hey, we got rid of our straws, so we're good. And now I'm going to go there. Look at your local coffee shop. Think about, I'm sorry, I'm like focusing so much on coffee, but I guess I just drink a lot of it. But when I started like way further after post-straw, post-bag journey for myself personally, I do now, I drink my coffee in the coffee shop. And that's not, you know, like, it sounds like a weird thing, but not only are you reducing, you know, your single-use consumption, but you're also taking a moment to think about that, right? And to think about everything else around you, and to notice things around you, right? And about how you're feeling. So very meditative, right? But that is the work that we all can do very easily. That is a very easy thing for us to do, to opt to leave our house, you know, 15 minutes early, to be able to sip our coffee from a reusable mug in the shop, right? And so yes, like that is a single action we can take, but also do research about the products you buy, especially the expensive ones, and especially the ones you use a lot, right? And so it doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be perfect, right? But it has to be something from everyone. Always.
So can I add so as damages and the troubles of fossil fuel dependency is becoming more and more visible, the greenwashing and promoting false solutions is also going to ramp up, because we'll be in more and more of a tight spot. And this is renewable, that's renewable, this is green, there's so many fallacies out there. And of course, in Iowa, the biggest one that Iowans, Democrats, Republicans, everybody totally bought into it is this biofuel mythology and ethanol and the next generation of ethanol, et cetera, et cetera. And again, I try to help people, analogies that help people realize, oh, I thought ethanol was good. No, well, you know, it turns out it damages the land. You know, it's like, we got to come up with kind of part of energy literacy, is because if we're talking about an energy transition, right, from fossil fuel to something else, and to reducing, right, dramatic reduction. Well, how are we what questions should we ask? You know, what questions should citizens subject any proposals to? And one of them is, how will this impact the land in the long run? How will this energy source that you're proposing going to impact the land in the long run? And if you subject that to ethanol, it's a disaster. It's an absolute disaster. But of course, in Iowa, it's like nobody can say that, because that's not going to get anywhere. So that's kind of that's the nature of this false solution and greenwashing. It's like everybody thinks ethanol is renewable. There's nothing renewable about it, absolutely nothing. So that's the thing. This greenwashing thing is pretty sleazy and pretty sophisticated, and people are fooled by it. So it's complicated. That's why we need energy literacy. Like, people say, all right, well, how should we think about this? So anyway.
Thank you very much.
And if Jonas, if I can just add, Jean wrote in the comments, our individual purchases matter.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because whether we like it or not, and I have mixed opinions, we live in a capitalist society, right? And so our purchases are power. Those are directly, like, we are signaling what we want. And it might feel like, and that is why even your individual purchase does matter, because it is aggregated as a pattern, as a trend that informs financial investments and decisions from a local all the way to an international level. And so just to like ground us in this fallacy, right? Because they are antithetical ideas. We have a finite amount of resources. That is a fact. That is a physical fact. On this planet, we have a finite amount of resources. That is not political. That is not partisan. It's not bipartisan. It is just a fact. And then we have a system that we've created that exists only because we believe it should. That is completely incongruent to facts. That is a problem. So unregulated capitalism will always, I'm always open to, new information. I'm willing to change my mind, but based off of what I know now, these are systems that just will never align.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm not sure you'll get a lot of argument here tonight about that, Tim.
Can I add one more thing really quickly before we move on?
Yeah.
Just for everyone here that's on the call and is looking for, actions that they can take as individuals. I echo what has been said about personal consumption. However, I just wanted to point out and make sure that we're all thinking about as well, like, with poverty and time poverty as well, it does make, ethical consumerism and taking the time to think about all of these choices difficult for some people. So if you're already doing that, if you're already putting that work in, sharing what you find and making it as accessible as possible. So if you found, a brand that uses no plastic packaging through your research and you've put the time into that, sharing that with your friends and family and other people that are looking to get involved. And then, with producing your own things, if you have your own garden, because you're bypassing that, purchase, potentially add to your garden and share with your neighbors and things like that. So just as we're thinking about ourselves, not all of us have the privileges needed to make some of those changes. I think everyone can make some of them, but there are others that aren't as accessible. So especially just the time thing. If you're spending the time to do that research, share it, please. Because I am too, and I still have lots of things that I need to get on that list. So send me what you find.
Thank you. Thank you, all three of you. So again, I'm going to let your leadership, your comments guide where we go here. And so given what we've just discussed, I'm going to ask you what I think might be the most controversial question, given all of us being on the same page with respect to climate. And I would invite all three of you to answer. Maybe we could start with you, Ayla. And here's the question. Many climate activists believe that we have no chance of averting climate calamity for the planet without urgent and bold action on the level of our federal government. How would you address their concern that trying to enact climate-friendly changes on the local or even the state level is a dangerous distraction? I didn't even mention personal level, making changes in their personal lives they believe can be a dangerous distraction. In spite of, we have these two theories. One is that by taking action as individuals, then that will motivate us to step up our game on the bigger battlefield. But the other argument is that a lot of people will say, well, I've changed my light bulbs. I'm not using plastic anymore, so I've done my part. So how would you address this concern that focusing on the local level is really counterproductive ultimately to our reaching the IPCC's targets in the extremely limited time that we have left?
I'll have a crack at it to start with. First of all, I don't think, I mean, it's true, we need bold action at the national level, but we really need bold action at every level. I mean, it's one of these problems that there is not one thing, and we need every level. The reality is, at the federal level, we don't have big leadership. And at the state, we don't have big leadership. What are we supposed to do? Right? So, I mean, whoever asked this question, the way you just said it is perfectly worded in that, yes, it's so urgent. All of us need to be, but how do we do it? How do we engage our church, our neighbors, our family, our county, our city? We got to do it. I mean, in order to move our federal government, something needs to change in our hearts, and we just got to do lots of things. It's not simple. It's really not simple. I don't think just convincing. How are we going to just convince the federal government? It's not, would the rest of us not make any changes? You see what I mean? I mean, it is a complicated thing. Everything has to change at once. We got to do everything we can. We really do. We can't just say, well, let's just wait until we pass a big, bold thing. So that's just all I can say right now.
Thank you. Ayla, thank you. Thank you very much, Kamyar.
I mean, obviously, I echo a lot of what Kamyar said. I think that, there are some things that can't really be forced. I mean, we're seeing that with vaccine and mask mandates. People are going to push back. So I don't, I think that, as Kamyar said, you have to convince your neighbors, you have to convince your city, you have to convince your state. It can't just be an order from the top. Well, I think that could be very effective and would definitely be the best answer for a lot of the industrial and commercial issues that we're seeing. It's definitely, not a fix-all. I would also sort of argue the point, while I think about that often. I think many activists in my self-proclaimed left sort of rip each other apart constantly on how we can best bring about what we need to see. But here, especially in Iowa, we're in this unique position where we don't have a voice very often. I don't think I can push the federal government very effectively on my own, unless I'm going to fly to DC and get arrested, which I've done, and it didn't seem to do much either. So from here in Iowa, because we have all these presidential candidates coming here very early, our Sunrise Hub here, through organizing and through the connections that we made, we were able to speak with representatives for every single Democratic candidate. And even though only one of them became president, we also have them in, as senators, as House reps, as government officials. So we were able to put, say our piece to those people and have that shared, that did in fact, then sort of infiltrate the federal government. And I don't really know if anyone has an answer on how I can better affect the federal government, please let me know. But especially at a state level, we've sort of reached an impasse. And then with, Joe Manchin, we've also reached an impasse, and it's one person holding up all of this. And it is very difficult to while I'm trying to save, my future and the future of the world, also go to school and do all of these other things and keep my mental health in check. And so if anyone, perhaps the people posing this question have a better way to influence the federal government, I'm very curious and move to that. But for me, local organizing has been able to do some of that. I don't think that they're mutually exclusive, that you have to focus on federal or on state or on local level to enact change. And I guess, the danger isn't putting your energy in a specific place. The danger is, I've done my part. If you say that at any point, that's the danger. If you say, I'm done growing, I'm not racist, I am not impacting the earth in a negative way, I'm not, breathing out chemicals, like I'm making less plastic than other people. I think that's the real danger, is I've done my part, I'm good, things can go back to normal. I'm comfortable with, my participation. So I think that as long as we keep pushing, wherever we're pushing can be effective.
Thank you, Ayla. I will offer a little, some perspective in response to your question, if somebody could tell me something different. But first, I would like to give Tam the opportunity to respond to this question.
All politics are local, right? I think this is probably a safe space group to, where that sentiment is shared. And I think about examples, right? Like if you have kids, are you like, only the teacher is going to teach them, no one else give them any other advice or wisdom, grandparents, shh, you have nothing to add, right? Food, there's people who grow it, there's people who transport it, there's people who sell it, right? There's policy that influences what is grown, how it's transported, how it is sold. Everything else in our life is local, state, federal, international, and everything in between.
Yeah.
And it is only just a ruse to say, oh, no, that's really a federal issue. But then we have the Paris Agreement, and no one wants to follow that in one tiny little town in Iowa. Oh, that's international stuff. That they don't know what it's like to live here. Fair enough. Good point. You're right. So how do we put these big global objectives? How do we distill that into what works locally? And in fact, that's the only way that this crisis will be solved, is distilling all of these fears that are transmitted through channels that have various levels of bias, various levels of trust for individuals, right? That is the only way this crisis will be addressed, is at a local level. Federal is important, state is important, but the most important, in my opinion, is local.
Okay, thank you very much, all three of you. And so here's something, Ayla, and in response to your question. And forgive me, I'm going to insert my personal experience into this discussion for a moment. It probably makes it a little more interesting, just to be straight up about that. The last 6 months of last year, I spent probably 200 to 300 hours phone banking for the various senatorial races around the country. And, I've been on the front lines, I've been arrested, all that stuff. But because of my understanding of what a brief window we have to achieve the IPCC's goals, I thought to myself, well, I didn't really think this through, to be honest with you, but I mean, it was kind of in my consciousness. I could either spend these 200 to 300 hours convincing my neighbors to stop using plastic, to reduce those. I love those, the extra two, repurpose and refuse, Tam, that you added tonight. Or I could try to help us as a climate team to achieve some chance of significant action that could possibly lead the world to achieve the IPCC's goals in time. So, talking to Marianne Miller Meeks, I promise you, is an absolute waste of time. But maybe working on the campaign to oust her is not a waste of time. And maybe phone banking for states that are not as red as we are, that could elect more progressive representatives, maybe. So that's all I'm saying. I'm not saying that in that sense, Tam, I wonder if we have evolved past. I'm just wondering if we've evolved past the notion that all politics is local. Because when I was calling Georgia, there was nothing local about it. Here I am in Iowa training phone callers in Montana and California to call Georgia. So isn't that well, just what do you think of that?
Here, I'll give. So I see, that's the thing. Everybody needs to find the level they are passionate about, because we do need to elect better people in Congress, right? We do need these national connections, but we also, I live in this neighborhood. You see, I live here. I walk to my place of work. This is where this is my community. That's where the action is. All the fossil fuel consumptions are happening in this community, right? In communities. But in order for us to make good decisions and be empowered to make changes, we do need state and federal policies to help us, all of those things. So, I don't think it's either or, right? Everything Tamara said, we need that. I'm glad you invested time to do that. It's just that you're passionate about that. I'm passionate about my neighborhood. We need all of the above. So.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, have you seen that map of North America, and it's like states and countries, and then you see the map of indigenous nations, right? And so when I talk about local, it's not necessarily local governments exclusively. It's that centralization, that community that can only happen locally. So certainly, so what does it look like to only make calls in more blue states than Iowa? Well, then you're not serving your local community maybe, and to Connor's point, yes, it takes all kinds. What are you passionate about? Fit in there, but that locality, or all politics is local. I know it's kind of, politics is kind of signals, I guess, to statehood and that kind of division. But I mean it more community focused, right? Because you do need to instigate that culture shift. Like, how many people in the chat, if you are a registered Republican, please identify yourself if you feel comfortable doing so. I'm gonna guess that there are not a lot of Republican individuals, registered Republicans, on this call. And that's something that we should pay attention to. I am actually going to go to the Lynn County Republican meetings, not because I'm a registered Republican, not because I'm compelled by any local legislation, but because I want to know what's being said in those rooms. And I have had conversations with, I work with a bipartisan board, and there are certain trigger words for these conservative individuals. And if that is the barrier, if it's just the word, well, that's something pretty easy actually to work past, right? And if that's all that exists, if that's the line that exists between us, well, actually locally, we can probably figure that out, right? That's going to be a lot harder to do at a state level. Not impossible, just harder. Need more connections, need more power, whatever, definitely harder to do at a federal level, definitely even more harder to do, or sorry, even the hardest to do at an international level, right? And so what are, again, back to this, it's not only, you know, the most climate vulnerable people that we're trying to pull along, it's the people who resist us. And what is the work that we're doing behind the scenes to make sure that there are Republicans in this room? Because climate change doesn't care about party lines, right? We know that.
Yeah.
So what are we doing to get Republicans to care about this? And maybe sometimes it's just using different words, which is kind of stupid in my opinion, but if it works, then I'm happy to do, you know what I mean? So yes, Jonas, you're right. All politics, I should rephrase it. Some politics are local and there are important political actions to take at every level.
Yeah.
Thanks. Thank you. Thank you. Ayla.
I mean, I don't have a whole ton to add to that. I guess I definitely thank you. Appreciate your opinion very much, and the work that you're doing as well. I guess my experience in organizing is similar to what's been said in that all change, you know, change at every level is necessary. But I think from an organizing perspective, what we're able to do as individuals, and I'm not talking like theoretically what we're able to do, but I mean like me personally, where I'm able to expend my energy in a way that I don't feel drained afterwards is local. I started doing a lot of things to push the state government, and then also in, you know, writing letters to the White House and calling during the open phone times and calling our federal representatives as well. And I really felt that all of the energy that I was putting into it was falling on deaf ears. I really like your idea of phone banking for representatives outside of our own state. I hadn't thought of that. And I did read in the chat something that was said, well, I think all politics are personal more than local. And I think that is something that is definitely true. I think that phone banking, where you're actually talking with people, because local isn't, with the age of social media that we have now, local can mean a lot of different things. We have communities online all over the world. So local doesn't necessarily mean like close within space, I guess. That was definitely a new way to think about it. So I appreciate that, Jonas.
Thank you very much for your response, and thank you. So we only have time for I think a few more questions, and again, following our discussion, and I'm going to ask the question in a loaded way, which and here it is, and we'll just open it to all of you to address as you will. And the question is this. Well, it's a two-part question. The first part is, can we affect, let me be more bold because we're among friends. Can we save this planet, life on this planet, without convincing 40% of the people in our country to somehow let go of their ideological identities and accept facts, that somebody mentioned facts earlier. And can we achieve this? Do we have any chance of achieving the IPCC's targets without convincing a significant number of, we'll just call them the folks on the other side of the aisle, to join in this fight? Or is it possible we could achieve it just by energizing those who already share the acceptance of the facts? So that's the first part of the question. And then the second part, which is much more difficult, is whatever your answer is, what's the best way of us doing it? So please, everyone, take a shot.
Since I have my microphone on and Ayla and Tam don't, well, I'm kind of, again, I can only speak from experience, and my experience here in where I live in getting things done is by articulating the issue and by inviting people to participate, and let's get busy, solve something, let's do something, right? So again, let's not talk about this. Let's talk about some other topic, like better floodplain management in our community, right? We know right now our laws are very weak. Anybody can go fill in the floodplain, build an apartment on it or a whole subdivision. And I was on the city council here in Cedar Falls when we suffered the floods of 2008, and what Cedar Rapids heavily suffered. And all of a sudden I learned that, oh, this floodplain ordinance is like, means nothing. It's just like, it's so outdated. It doesn't even match the kind of climate we're experiencing. So we got busy with the very people who were affected by those floods. We talked, got lots of meetings. We came up with an ordinance language that passed the city council unanimously. And right now we have the strongest floodplain really in any of the Iowa cities. Unfortunately, no other city really adopted. I worked really hard, went around the state doing that. But I'm coming back to this first. In other words, we got together, we passed the toughest ordinance, and the people of Cedar Falls are safer as a result of it. We're not going to suffer. Floods of the future aren't going to cause damage in Cedar Falls. And if every other city along the Cedar had done the same, and also invested in upstream solutions, which is better land management, we would be much more resilient. So this is totally within reach. Now, I don't know if the people in the community who helped us pass that floodplain ordinance were Republican, Democrat, or anything. We just had a problem in front of us, we solved it. The same in community food access solutions. We're doing things. We're really, regardless of state leadership, we are doing all kinds of good stuff in our community. Nobody else is going to come and do it for us. Okay, so back to this climate thing. Again, that's the scale I know. I think if we want as a state to, as a region, we need to start right now. My center and Tamara and many others are involved. Iowa Environmental Council, Mike Carberry, others are involved in helping communities develop climate action plans and resilience plans for resiliency. And that's what we need. We need to invite people to participate. Again, it's a small step, and but you got to have benchmarking. You got to have all this stuff, and we can do some of this. So we got to figure out ideas that ordinary people relate to, and it's not easy. I'm not saying, wow, I have the formula, it's going to work. It's just a difficult task of strengthening democracy, building trust amongst each other. I love what you said, Tam. We need everybody, right? It's just so dumb. Democrat Republican thing is so dumb to think that there's only two ways of thinking. It just doesn't make any sense, you know? So anyway, I'm hopeful. We don't really have a lot of option. We don't have the luxury of just saying, well, I'm not hopeful, you know. No, we have work to do, and it is urgent, and we got to, you know, again, my best hope is that it needs to start at communities where people are. So
thank you. Ayla or Tam, please take a couple minutes and chime in if you would.
I can go quick with Tam.
Ayla.
Okay.
Good. Give me more time. It's a huge question.
Yes, it's a huge question, and I'm going to come out right away and say that I don't have answers. I guess I think that we could get a lot more people on board I think that the idea of 40% of the population being on board isn't an insane one. I think that that would definitely be the best way to do this, and potentially would be the only way to do this, to enact real change. I mean, in the scale that we need to fight this crisis. However, I think that what we need is to, move culture. I think I again speak. I've only lived for an extended period of time in the United States, so I can only speak to our own consumer culture. But I think that that is pretty, universal in some sense. So I think moving away from that and having a cultural shift towards unity in some sense, and just talking about the greater good rather than, climate or anything like that. I think that the funny thing to me that always comes back to me is like, oh, what if we do all of this stuff to make the planet better, and then like climate change isn't real? Wouldn't that suck? Like, what? And that's the argument for all of these deniers, is like, why would we spend money making the air cleaner and the water cleaner and creating new jobs that are safer and unions if the world isn't ending? And we obviously know that we're going to face apocalyptic crisis if the planet warms beyond 1.5, but we're not saving life on the planet. Life will go on without us. It's human life that we're saving, and mass extinction as well. But this world has seen mass extinction before, and life bounces back. But I really think that if we can start talking about the benefits that are more in line with other people's beliefs. I mean, it's hard for me to comprehend why talking about a sort of like community where we're taking care of the planet isn't in line with people's beliefs. That's not what they want to spend money on. But climate solutions are solutions to many of our problems, or at least steps towards fixing many of our problems. And I think that on a personal level, everyone has some stake in this. And if we can try to relate more to that, I think that getting 40% on board will be easy. That's a great theory. I know we are extremely split right now, and everyone seems to be thinking partisanly. But I think that's sort of a false narrative that we've been given through social media and other things. I think that when we talk to people face to face, again, in that personal, politics are all personal level, I think that we relate to each other more than we could ever know. And in times of crisis, we somehow all manage to pull together. I just hope that we can manage to do that before it is too late.
Thank you.
Well said, Ayla. Well said.
So Tam, please take a minute or two and respond, and then we're going to ask you all for your final vision of hope for our nation and for the world.
Yeah, I mean, Jonas, that was a huge question. And to my knowledge, no one has ever solved climate change to date. And so it's one of those, as working at the county, someone asked, what does planning and development do? What does facilities do? What does conservation do? People kind of understand that because there are pretty standard procedures that other municipalities across the country follow. Could be variations, but more or less what happens. But no one has solved climate change yet. And I think we at Linn County have recently, or last fall, completed our first greenhouse gas inventory. Unsurprisingly, the majority of our CO2 emissions or carbon emissions come from Cedar Rapids, our largest municipality. Of that, 70% are from industry, and of that 70%, there are really just 5 major industries that are contributing to those emission levels. But most people don't know that. And so, I think back from my own experience, why do I care about this topic? Well, I likely had access to someone else who cared about the topic, who shared their vision, their knowledge, their understanding, their compassion about the implications of investing in this work. That is a privilege that many people around us do not have. And so having a level of humility in that interaction with someone who might not care because they don't know why they should care is important for us all to have. And I think, it's also about opportunity and access to, I guess, access to opportunity, really, right? Because the person who's going to, our top 5 emitters going to work every day isn't a bad person, still needs a job. So it's not as simple as regulating those industries to the point where they close down. We have a reduced tax base locally in our governments. We lose jobs, and then now we have a mass amount of people upset at the environmental movement for no other reason because they lost their livelihood, which is a pretty good reason. And so, I think Darrow put in the chat, it's not so much about convincing people, right? But it's showing people the way.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Showing what we know, sharing what we know, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. and building that understanding. And then also listening is probably the most important, right? Listening to the needs. Because I'm sure if you were to ask this factory worker that's going, just doing their job, do you want the earth to burn up? Right? They're probably going to say no. 90%, 99% of people are probably going to say no to that. But what's the alternative? Right? And so I do, we have to, I don't know if it's convincing the 40% of those people, but showing them what we know, increasing access to that knowledge, increasing access to opportunities to allow those individuals to make different choices. And this goes back to, what I'm really passionate about is coalition building, right? Finding that intersectionality of causes. And we're not going to agree on everything, but there are going to be pieces we agree on. And I have a colleague who when I first met them, they were like, I don't think your position should exist. I don't think government should be working in this, in the realm of sustainability. And every time we talk, we have this understanding that foundationally, we have very different perspectives. And we know that about one another. And so those conversations are never 100% comfortable. But the other day, we had another conversation, and I left that, and this individual said, I really appreciate our conversations. And I said, I do too. Not because they're fun and we agree about everything, right? But I leave that conversation with a better understanding of something, a perspective that I just didn't know before, and vice versa. Yeah. And I believe that we can all do that within our sphere, right? Is to have that humility, take the time to share what we know, but listen to what we don't. And then figure out what the next step is together.
Thank you, Tam. Thank you very much. And thanks to all 3 of you. And I'm going to ask you, please, for your final remarks. And I hope our participants will be okay if we go over 2 or 3 minutes. But if each of you could just take a minute or two and share, I guess maybe if you're willing, just to share why you are hopeful. And I think it'd be nice to leave our participants with that uplifting vision from each of you. So whoever would like to go, please go.
I am hopeful because the other people in this fight still have some hope. I am hopeful because of the power of the people. To be honest, there are days and quite often that I do not have much hope. And yet I am still here and I keep going. I often say it would sure be nice to just be like a regular college kid and have lots of free time and be able to think about planning for the future and my prospects and savings and 401k without thinking about, will the planet even be here for me to have those things? But really, it's the other people in this movement that give me hope. Seeing them keep getting up after every time we don't win. And keep going. That's really what does it for me. The fact that revolutions have happened, they've caused real change. The fact that we have the solutions, and so often it seems that the solutions that we're finding are just moving back to Indigenous ways of thinking. So I really, to me, recentering Indigenous peoples in this land, bringing their voices to the forefront, that gives me hope. I had the great privilege of going to Washington, D.C. to be part of an Indigenous-led movement, and their voices were really what gave me the most hope. It seems like many of us, speaking for myself, a white person, that when we come back to these answers, us for the first time often, we come back to these solutions and then realize that these were the things that were happening here before we got here, and solutions that have been offered to us very long ago. And we spent all of this time fumbling around trying to gain more control of the world. And every time we get more control, we also lose a lot of control. So I guess returning to that is really what gives me hope. And again, just the other people in this movement that I've been able to follow, and the fact that somehow me, an art major who, is not a scientist, hasn't even got a bachelor's degree yet, and is quite young and came from a very rural, small town, was able to enact some change on my state level that then has, or at my city level that then has influenced other things in the state, really gives me hope for the amount of other people I see in this movement, and the passion and fire that they have, and the knowledge that they have, would be able to bring us to a point that I think that we can survive. So
thank you, Ayla. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Very well said, Ayla. Wonderful. And really, my students at UNI give me hope. They see it, they see through all this, and they're amazed that why our current leaders aren't acting. Like, they're asking these questions. I guess what gives me hope is knowing that people before us have also been in tough positions, and they worked hard and changed things in ways, and we're a recipient of their hard work. And what gives me hope is that there are excellent, we know nearly everything we need to know to act. This is really good. We don't need a whole lot more research to do what we need to do. This is a good thing. We know the vast majority of actions we need to take, we already know. And again, I firmly believe that we need to talk about this. We need to get together in our communities, develop plans, and act on those plans. We need to engage people. So that I guess gives me hope. I don't think we really have a lot of alternatives. We need to help. Kind of emergency is a matter of perception. We need to help people perceive emergency. And if they don't perceive emergency, we're not going to act. And we need to see this as an emergency that is affecting our lives here in our communities, derecho, floods, etc., and the disparities that these things are going to magnify and multiply. So I'm very hopeful. We really don't have options but to act, to get together with our friends and neighbors and community leaders, and as Ayla has done, as Tam is doing, as a lot of us are doing, and act and show that good things are possible. And we need to see examples of communities that are transitioning. We need to see those things, and seeing that, okay, this is, we can do this. We're doing this in farming, right? We've shown, in spite of all the bad example of agricultural policies we're seeing, yet organic farmers and others are demonstrating that we can totally have a productive agriculture without any of this stuff. That's when I was in grad school, that's what taught me that, we don't have to put up with this stuff. We already know how to farm without damage and destruction. And here we are 30 years later, incredible progress in so many more organic farmers, so many more good things in our food system. Ways to go yet, but that's kind of what gives me hope. We know we can do these things.
Thank you very much. And Tam, your closing of hope.
Yeah, no, I mean, if you wake up, you have hope, right? You have a new day. It's unwritten. You can do whatever you are capable of doing in that day. Sometimes it's a little, sometimes it's a lot. For me, sometimes it's usually a more on the little side. To Ayla's point, it is tiring work, right? But also to Ayla's point, there are good people doing it. And what I say to a lot of people is look around whenever you're in a room, find the people who care about the things you do, right? Because you need that passion, that excitement, that enthusiasm, the skills you can find. You can learn, you can find whatever. To Ayla's point about, her creation, have a vision and then you'll figure out the pieces along the way. You will. And I guess I often say this if when I'm moderating sessions, but find, maybe not in this room, maybe in life, but find an organization, a person who you don't agree with, and figure out how you can get them to care about the thing that you do. And if you listen long enough, you're going to find a nugget that connects. And that is what we need to do. This movement cannot be traditional environmentalists any longer. Everyone in this room knows the work that needs to be done. And that's awesome. That's such a good thing because we all touch different circles across Iowa. Now, who is missing? Just find that one person, right? And figure out how you can connect what you care about. And that will take time. That will take a couple conversations. That will take a coffee. That will take inviting them over to dinner, inviting them out for a walk, and do that work. That's it. Find someone you disagree with, but enough that you can still connect and befriend them and work together.
Thank you. Thank you all. Ayla, Kamyar, Tam, it is really a privilege to sit with the three of you tonight and to listen to your extremely thoughtful experience and ideas about what's best or how we move forward. And we honor your commitment. We're so grateful for the three of you. And as a matter of fact, we're grateful for all of the team that assembled this call, for Pam and Jess, who worked tirelessly at this day in and day out, Mike Carberry, and all of those who joined us tonight and who do things, who are making an effort. And we hope that everyone who joined us will take the inspiration and example of the three of you and somehow find it in them to discover more deeply their own passion and then to move into that role more. So